And on the 8th day, God looked down on his planned paradise and said, I need a caretaker. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody willing to get up before dawn, milk cows, work all day in the fields, milk cows again, eat supper, then go to town and stay past midnight at a meeting of the school board. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody willing to sit up all night with a newborn colt and watch it die, then dry his eyes and say, maybe next year. I need somebody who can shape an axe handle from a persimmon sprout, shoe a horse with a hunk of car tire, who can make harness out of hay, wire, feed sacks, and shoe scraps, who planting time and harvest season will finish his 40-hour week by Tuesday noon, and then painin' from tractor back put in another 72 hours. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody strong enough to clear trees and heave bales, yet gentle enough to yean lambs and wean pigs and tend the pink-combed pullets, who will stop his mower for an hour to splint the broken leg of a meadowlark. So God made a farmer. It had to be somebody who'd plow deep and straight and not cut corners. Somebody to seed, weed, feed, breed, and rake and disc and plow and plant and tie the fleece and strain the milk. Somebody who'd bale a family together with the soft, strong bonds of sharing. Who would laugh and then sigh and then reply with smiling eyes when his son says that he wants to spend his life doing what Dad does. So God made a farmer.
Can everybody hear me okay? Is this thing on? All right, so most of you have probably seen this video, at least at the Super Bowl. If you've been in agriculture, you've seen it at least a million times. This is not the first video that Paul Harvey did with this. Actually, Dodge stole this one off of an earlier video, but I thought this one kind of resonated with what we're talking about today, and that's communication to today's consumers, but also communication with everyone in this room. And so I really want to spend some time today talking about, one, about communication, but two, talking about transparency within communication. And that transparency is for everyone in this room as well. I really, really enjoy this video. Where do I click? Here. There we go. So what is on consumers' minds today? That's a question we always get. What do consumers actually, what do they want? We sit through these classes oftentimes, and consumers, the top topics that they discuss are animal welfare, obviously antibiotics in the center, GMOs, organic, or hormones. My thought process behind that is American consumers have become spoiled. They can go to the grocery store and they have multiple options. Depending on your income level, you have even more options. You don't have to worry about food safety so much. Okay, I made a comment today to our group when we were talking. If consumers in America really wanted to worry about food safety, they should go spend a week in Honduras. And then they'll understand what food safety really is. Okay, we have the safest food supply here in America of anywhere in the United States or anywhere in the world, and we should take pride in that. And so consumers today should be more concerned about how do we feed the planet in 2050. Population growth is estimated to increase 2 billion people by 2050. That means we as farmers have to increase our production by 60%. Minimum, 60% to be able to feed the world population today. As of today, 1/4 of the planet's 7 billion people have trouble with hunger. Most of those not here in the United States. So now we start to understand consumers have a disconnect. They have it made here. They have choices. They don't have to worry about being hungry. Go to third world countries and you can see where the hunger initiative becomes an issue. What we don't see in this slide, and if you go to The Guardian, you can read on in this one, is that 1/3 of the groceries purchased each and every week are wasted. So if you purchase 3 bags of groceries at the grocery store, throw 1 bag on the way home, and that's how many groceries you've wasted for that week. I deal with it daily, at my house even. Drives me insane. My kids, you clean your plate. We're not throwing anything away. And so the question is, how do we feed the population in 2050 when the pressure from consumers continues to increase and to decrease margins for farmers, but also increase oversight on farmers and what we do. They control us from every direction on how we farm and how we live our day-to-day lives. So with that in mind, also, how do we talk to these consumers and help them understand what we're going through each and every day, but help them understand that, hey, you have a safe food supply. We're doing our very best to be able to combat that. Okay? Oh, sorry about that. So who is our consumer? Obviously the millennial. You talked about it in your presentation. Okay, so the millennial. Do you know that the average attention span of a millennial today is 7 seconds? 7 seconds. I would argue with my kids it may be less than that. Okay? The average attention span of a gerbil is 8 seconds. Perhaps I should start marketing to gerbils. Okay? Now, with that being said, what that tells me is we have 7 seconds within social media or whatever marketing platform we're using or whatever avenue that we're using to tell our story. We have 7 seconds to capture the attention of that consumer. And it better be good. Because what captures their attention better than anything? Scare tactics, fear. What captures their headlines? What's the worst story they see? That's the first one that they're going to go to. Do we want to tell that story? No, we don't want to spread fear and panic. Okay? So we're trying to compete with someone who scares consumers into reading what they have to say versus encouraging them to tell our story. Sometimes that is a difficult thing to do. What I want to do right now is I actually want you to get your phones out. We're going to do a little interactive thing. So 80% of consumers today get their news from social media or Google. All right? I'm one of those. I don't read the newspaper. I hate the news. Will not watch it. It's always terrible. Makes me depressed. So I get mine from social media as well. But I do take it one step further, and I go check my sources when I get my news from those, which most people do not do. So I want you to go to Google, and I want you to type in antibiotics in animals. Antibiotics in animals. This is where the transparency piece in this room comes into play. And I'm not saying this to offend anyone in the room. I want to preface that. Nothing. But I want you to type in antibiotics in animals. Not animal production, not livestock. It gets worse if you type in those things. But antibiotics in animals. I don't know about you guys, but I didn't see anything about actually antibiotic use in animals until I got to the second page. And it took me 45 seconds minimum just to scroll through and read the titles of those first 9 things that showed up on there. We've already lost the attention span of our consumer. Okay? So let me show you what popped up on mine first, guys. This one. Now, this is from the CDC website. Who in here agreed? Who in here had this one pop up first? Now, so if you click on this link, okay, it actually takes you to a different website. It's not the CDC website. But they use the CDC website to draw you in. Okay, so I clicked on it. I read all the articles. Got really leftist. Okay. What I really am concerned about this caption here. When you read that, and you have 7 seconds to do that, okay, you read that and you say animals in the USA consume more than twice as many medically important antibiotics as humans. 70% more. What's the consumer think? Immediately, the consumer says, oh my God, the meat I'm eating is full of antibiotics. Okay? That resonates. This is true. This is real world. When I looked at this, that's the first thing I thought. It's full of antibiotics. Look how much more we're using in I'm part of agriculture. Wait a minute. I'm using 70% more than humans? So then I got to thinking, what's the real truth behind this? Let's look at this thing. Let's use Dr. Dorman's video yesterday, and let's use a spin on words here. And let's portray this different. Let's look at all the facts. Let's look at every entire fact. This is what I thought when I saw that. My 3-year-old gets it. Oh, I'm in a meeting with these folks. And I have to present this, okay? So I'm a little frustrated at this point, but let's look at the real truth, guys. And when I looked at the agenda, I realized that out of the 30-something speakers here, I'm the only one that doesn't have an MD, DVM, or PhD beside my name. So this is cowboy math, all right? Straight from the farm, okay? So I did this in about 10 minutes this morning using Google search, all right? And what I did was I looked at the population of the United States today, 327 million Americans. I quickly calculated just using beef, poultry, and pork. Left out the other animals. Let's don't bring pets into the equation. 9.2 billion head of livestock, roughly. Pork is a different one. That's a little harder one to calculate. Those statistics are all over the place. You got to calculate sows and you got to calculate weaned pigs per year. It gets really hairy. But I come up with about 120 million head, roughly, counting sows and weaned pigs sold every year. Okay, so 9.2 billion head of livestock. Well, then what I did was I calculated the average size of those animals on the farm at any given day, what their weight would be in terms of how much antibiotic we would have to use to treat that amount of animals. And then I looked up the average size of Americans today. I thought that was a little odd, or maybe I'm just way bigger than the average size American. It's about 175 pounds between men and women. So I've overshot my landing. Pounds versus pounds. If you look at it from a true statistical standpoint, Americans weigh about 48 billion pounds total. That's including 27 million kids. No, 73 million kids, sorry. Livestock, about 175 billion pounds. Okay? Now, if you look at that, the percentage of pounds of Americans versus pounds of livestock is 27%. Okay? Or is everybody with me at this point? A lot of statistics. I'm a numbers guy. I'm going to go back, and you can't see it, but in this caption down here, it says that humans use 27.5% of all the antibiotics in the United States. 27.5. Coincidental, right? That would leave 72.5% for animals to use in animal production. That is correct. If we look at it on a straight pound-to-pound basis, humans are using exactly the same amount of antibiotics per pound as livestock producers. But we don't see that in that advertisement that we see right here. And that's what's frustrating to me. When I'm trying to educate a consumer who sees this and not this. Okay? So I would encourage the folks in the room who are sharing these, who have the money to, on a Google search, get your post up there first, because I know it's money driven. It's how many dollars you throw at it to put yours up there. And the first 9 articles that popped up on my search this morning were scholarly articles, and every one of them said antimicrobial resistance. I didn't ask anything about antimicrobials. I asked about antibiotics in animals. That is frustrating. So how do we, as a room, collectively get together to combat that issue? How do we tell that story when the first thing that pops up with the people that we're working with on this is antimicrobial resistance? And the first headline that I see is that farmers are using 70% more antibiotics than humans. It's just a little frustrating. So the question is, how does 1%, that's us, 1% of the population, educate the other 99%? And it's easy when you are a extreme minority to get a finger placed, right? We all know that. When you're in a minority position, it's easy for everybody to say it's your fault because you can't fight back. You're 1% and declining. When Paul Harvey did that, he actually wrote that in 1975, presented it to the FFA convention in 1978. 3% of the population at that time farmed. 2 to 3 generations removed from the farm was the average consumer. 40 years later, today, 1.3% are farmers. 4 to 5 generations removed from the farm. So that story that we tell, that Dr. Dorman talked about, is increasingly important, that we educate the public. Okay? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my operation and how I tell my story. Okay? So I have 4 children. Have a diversified operation. I have 100 head of mama cows, 20,000 laying hens, and they're organic. The cattle are not. The chickens are. And then I oversee 1,800 acres of hemp production. So throw a really big twist in the chain there. So my story, actually, what I realized on social media several years ago was the fact that I could post statistics all day long to tell my story. I could put pictures of me out there. I could put pictures of my cattle out there. Maybe 10 likes. I could put a picture of my son in his underwear running around on the farm, and my page would blow up and the comments would go insane. So I realized at that moment, people resonate with kids. Okay? My kids are farm kids. They tell the story. They know how to tell the story. But consumers see my kids doing those farm chores, and then they start to ask me questions. And that's the best way for me to be able to share my story is when they ask me questions. Why is your son or daughter doing that? It's dark in the barn. It's 5:30 in the morning. Why is your daughter and son down in the barn helping you work show cattle at 5:30 in the morning? That's their choice. I don't make them do that. They want to go. And when I don't get them up at 5:30 to go feed the show cattle, they're upset with me. That's the story I get to share with consumers. Because my kids understand that the cattle get fed before we get fed. And that's a very important story, and that resonates with consumers. They understand that. They see that. Even though their kids aren't exposed to it, you'd be amazed at the comments I get. Can I send my kid to your house for a week? Absolutely, but I promise they won't be the same when they come back, whether good or bad. All right, so I tell my story. Here's my kid in the diapers. I think I got 300 likes on that. Little 3-year-old dragging a bucket to the barn. And then comments come pouring in. Child labor laws apply? I promise. Not on the farm. Not on the farm. That's the funnest thing he can do all day. He's 4 now. I think he might have been 2 here. He's 4 now, and you ask him what his favorite thing that he does every day is, I get to go with Daddy and go feed the cows. And when I tell that story, consumers suck it up. They love it. They depend on me for information now, where before, when I was sharing statistics, I was just like that average farmer. Just sharing statistics, running things down their throat. But now they get to ask me questions, and I get an opportunity to share my story. My son actually palpating a cow. Okay? He was 7 here. He really wanted to learn. And you'll notice he's wearing polka-dotted bibs. So in all these pictures, my kids, they share whatever clothes are available. When you have 4, it's first come, first served. So you'll see my son wearing pink pants and my girls wearing blue jeans that their brother had. Whatever they can find, that's what they grab. Other stories. Bottle calf. My youngest daughter and my oldest daughter. And actually, she's giving antibiotics here. She's helping me vaccinate, or she's actually vaccinating cattle with me. And so I got an opportunity there to tell the story about how we vaccinate our cattle and why we vaccinate our cattle. We vaccinate our cattle to prevent needing the use of antibiotics as much as we can. And we can use vaccines to do that. And my kids understand the importance, and now they can share that information. I had a video, but for sake of time, I didn't put it on here. We were doing that the same day that we were preg checking cows, and we were putting eggs or embryos in cows as well. And so my daughter, at 8 years old, was asking the vet, so how do you find the uterine horn, and how do you know which uterine horn that the egg is in, or where you need to put the egg? And people just couldn't believe that an 8-year-old would be having these conversations, but that's how we talk about reproduction at my house. If he goes any further, my wife gets included. Which one resonates with you most when you talk about antibiotics and how we treat our cattle? This picture here or an 8-year-old giving a shot? When we talk to consumers, this is a story, this is the narrative that consumers want to see. That's the feel-good feeling that they want when they go to talk about beef, when they talk about the story of farming and why these kids do what they do on the farm. I don't make them do this, but I guarantee you their mother is pretty upset when they choose to do this over spending time with her, because that is their first choice. Let's go to the barn with Dad. You'd be amazed at the amount of pictures or the likes that we get and the comments that we get. You actually lay on your cows, they get treated better than we do. Those cows get bathed every day. They get fed twice a day. They get the best feed. It's like eating a steak buffet every day for those cows. They want for nothing, I can assure you. I pay for it. So we get to tell that story, and that was at the state fair. The consumers that come through the state fair and see my young son laying on his heifer, you'd be amazed at how many people stop and ask, "Is that safe? Can he do that?" I promise that cow will follow him all the way back to the house because she knows he has feed. So we get to tell that story. That's what I really like. So again, what message should we be actually sharing? What message should we be sharing? Should we share this message here? It is very informative. Don't doubt that a bit. It's full of statistics. Very important. But when you lead with this image for consumers to see, are we delivering the right message? Are we delivering the message that embedded in this is the fact that on a one-to-one basis, on an apples-to-apples basis, humans are consuming just as many antibiotics as livestock. Now, I don't have the science to back that up. So, I just did cowboy math this morning to figure that out, but it didn't take me long to figure that out. Or should we be telling the story here? And I use this picture because I feel like sometimes that's what we're doing with consumers, we're doing with industry partners. We're trying to encourage them, to grab them. Please, just listen to what I'm saying. Just follow me. Just, come on, can we get together here? She's pleading with the heifer like, I know you're tired. It's hot. This was 95 degrees this day. Can you come on? This was in the newspaper. And we weren't even in that county. I got newspaper copies mailed to me from that county. It was 2.5 hours away. People ate that story up. Or should we be telling these stories? So these folks are our future consumers. And these four over here are the ones that are going to feed those future consumers. That's the story that we have to tell. These four children right here, at some point in their life, will be feeding everyone in this line right here. How do we educate these young ones to bridge that gap so that these folks can understand over here what we're doing on the farm? And why, in the other picture, my daughter was feeding this calf the morning that I took it in before they even got ready to go to school. She was out feeding the bottle to that calf that morning. Those kids can understand someday. And hopefully, if we can teach our young ones, they can deliver that message at school each and every day. This was a ranch up in North Dakota I visited. I was up doing a loan up here, and he had his 2-year-old out there branding cattle with him, working cattle, vaccinating and branding and doing everything right there with them. This is in my egg house here, and I'll tell you a story about my egg house real quick, and I know we're probably short on time. So I have an organic egg laying operation. 20,000 laying hens we're getting about 18,000 eggs a day right now. They go to Whole Foods. Okay? Now, do I eat organic? No. You can tell. All right? Food is just whatever comes available for me. Do I believe that organic has a place? Absolutely. If the consumer wants it, they're willing to pay me for it, I'm a capitalist. I'm going to capitalize on whatever they're willing to pay for. That's what keeps me in business. So I have an organic laying operation, and that gives me an opportunity a lot of times to talk to people about organics and why I don't use organic, or why I don't eat organic foods or go out of the way to eat organic foods. The only organic foods I eat are those eggs right there. But with 20,000 laying hens. But the story is, 2 flocks in a row now in that laying barn, we've had 2 disease outbreaks. The first one, so those birds go outside on 50 acres of grass during the day. They're called pastured poultry, right? One of your labels, right? So the company that I work with, they've been experts at marketing those labels. So these are pastured poultry. They go out on 50 acres. They ran into wildlife in the area that carried a strain of fowl cholera, or a strain of cholera that would transfer to fowl. Okay? We broke with that disease, and at the time I was losing less than 1%. Less than 1 bird a day out of 19,000 birds. A week later, I was losing 100 birds a day. 3 weeks later, I was losing 300 birds a day. 3 months later, I had 10,000 birds and they euthanized them all. That's the story we don't get to tell. That's the story we don't tell because nobody wants to know that we had to euthanize 10,000 birds because I couldn't use antibiotics. That I was carrying wheelbarrow loads of dead birds out daily because I couldn't use antibiotics. fowl cholera can easily be cured or managed with antibiotics. But I didn't have that option. That cost me about $80,000 in lost production, lost revenue. I still had a $9,000 a month payment that I had to make with no income coming. Okay? These are the stories that you don't hear about. The next year, and this goes back to the transparency piece, and I heard a lot of conversation today about we want to come out on your farms, USDA wants to be involved, FDA wants to be involved, we want some more government oversight. That's great. I'm glad you're interested in that. But I'll give you a little story about my last flock. Flock was working great. Peak production, I was at 97% peak production. And because we sell eggs, USDA had to come out and do swabs for salmonella and E. coli. Okay? Losing maybe 2 birds a week. Best flock I've ever had. Losing maybe 2 birds a week. USDA came out, did their swabs. A week later, broke with E. coli. No problems up to that point. A week later, I broke with E. coli. Started losing 10 birds a day, 20 birds a day, 30 birds a day. 4 months later, euthanized my flock again. Couldn't use antibiotics. This time it only cost me $70,000. They brought me birds back a little faster. Those again, once again, are the stories I can't tell. That also makes farmers a little nervous about letting outsiders come on my farm. I don't let anybody come in that chicken house other than my employees, except for USDA and Whole Foods and the Organic Association, whatever their letters are. Those are the only people that come in my chicken house. And that's why. Because we have an organic chicken operation, I can't use antibiotics. And when you bring in an outside contaminant or a pathogen, it wipes me out. USDA call and say, sorry, we may carry that in. We're willing to help. No. The only thing I got was a notice that we're going to euthanize your birds in the next 2 weeks. So that's what we deal with when we don't have the use of antibiotics. And unfortunately, I don't tell that story because I'm ashamed to be able to tell that story. I don't want consumers to know that I had to kill 10,000 birds because I couldn't use antibiotics. And so when people ask me the organic conversation, this is usually my go-to when we do have that conversation. All right, so I told you I teach my kids to tell the story. My daughter's telling it to the governor of Kentucky. My little boy's telling it to the commissioner of agriculture. And the year before, he was on the news telling to everybody in Kentucky what we do on the farm. What we do on the farm. That is what communication to me is about. That's how we tell our story. That's how you guys help us tell our story. This is a story that we have to deliver to consumers, to the public, that reads that post in 7 seconds. I promise you, when they see that picture right there, 7 seconds, we got them. We got them. But the statistics, it's a gloss look. Okay? So help me tell that story. On behalf of America's farmers, Boone says thank you. Thank you for having our attention and letting us talk.